Welcome back. Well, the Call Me Mr. program has expanded into more Louisiana schools. It's all designed to pull teachers from more diverse backgrounds. Jason Gregory spoke to the program director at Grambling about it today and joins us with details. Jason?
Jennifer, I met with Dr. George Knopflin Jr., who was a part of the first Call Me Mr. program in the state at Louisiana Tech. Dr. Knopflin was then recruited to Grambling to help bring the program there. Call Me Mr. helps to combat the problem with the lack of black male teachers in schools.
Sooner a black child sees a black teacher, especially between grades 3 and 5, the higher likely they are to go off to college or to some secondary education.
The program, which initially started at Clemson in 2000, has reached many universities across the country. And since the program's inception in Louisiana, the percentage of black male teachers has grown to above the national average.
Recognizing and exposing the wonderful program that we have and letting the state of Louisiana know that we are desiring to reverse the statistic of having less than 2% of the teachers be men of color across the country.
In addition to expanding to more universities, the Call Me Mr. program at Grambling has implemented its own program within itself,
where we collaborate with school districts and we go and we have our young men go and mentor young men that are middle school and high school students.
The Call Me Mr. program at Grambling is the largest in the nation. This program has expanded to LSU, McNeese State, and Northwestern State. And Dr. Knopflin believes this program will continue to expand into more schools around the state and the country.